I'm Ann Archer. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of Spiritual Awakenings International, and I would like to introduce Dr. Lawrence Edwards. He'll be speaking about Kundalini Awakening, maps of the journey. I'm very impressed with his background as he trained as a monk in India in an ancient Kundalini yoga lineage. He also trained for decades in the Buddhist tradition and received teachings and empowerments from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. He is a teacher, a mentor, and a guide for the path of Kundalini and non-dual spiritual development. He served as president of the Kundalini Research Network. He's a board-certified neurobiofeedback clinician and licensed psychotherapist. He was on the faculty of New York Medical College for 24 years. He is the author of numerous works, including The Soul's Journey, Guidance from the Divine Within, and Awakening Kundalini, The Path to Radical Freedom. Please help me welcome Dr. Lawrence Edwards.
Thank you, Ann. That was wonderful. And so good to be a part of this extraordinary group that you all have come, gathered together, Yvonne, and I was just listening to our old dear friend Jyoti, and just exceptional and so important to be able to have this kind of gathering. Buddha talked about the three jewels, one of which was a like-minded community, because we need that to support ourselves on the path and where we're going. So I want to thank you for carrying that and putting together these extraordinary meetings and opportunities. So kudos to you. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. So I'm going to be talking about the maps of the journey. Kundalini has been at the center of my life for as long as I can think. So it's something that experiences for me began when I was a little child and continued on and carried me into academic studies, my doctoral dissertation on Kundalini, everything. So I want to share some of, as briefly as I can, because there's so much in this vast area to be able to learn. And so I'm going to be talking about, awakening Kundalini and the maps of the journey. Because so often what happens when people are contacting me, they're saying, well, what's going on? What is this journey and what's happening? And two of the books that I wrote, the first one was The Soul's Journey, Guidance from the Divine Within, is all about Kundalini in a very personal way, as well as drawing on archetypal mythological symbols, drawing on the work of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. And then Tammy Simon, the head of Sounds True, asked me to write a book that would be kind of a how-to manual to get oriented. So many people having spontaneous experiences and not knowing what's going on. So Sounds True asked me to write this book, Awakening Kundalini, The Path to Radical Freedom, in order to really help give an integrative perspective. It's also accompanied by an audio program of the same title that's about 7.5 hours, if anybody's interested. Today, I'm also going to be speaking some about an article that came out last fall in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology. And it was by myself and a dear colleague and friend, Marjorie Wollicott, who helped me to get the research and the findings of that research that were my doctoral dissertation back in 1986 and 87, finally out in publication. Now, the journal has it behind a paywall, but if you email me through the soulsjourney.com website, I'm happy to send you a copy. So when we talk about maps of the journey, and there are many different maps, few things to keep in mind, because the maps are highly symbolic. They're metaphysical, they're not physical. This isn't Google's maps. This isn't, the road map you take out in your car. This is all about this terrain of consciousness. And part of the reason why it's so highly symbolic is ordinary language can't be used to describe these things. Many of the experiences, consciousness itself, is beyond ordinary language, beyond the mind. And so the maps that are used to point, because symbols point beyond themselves. And so encoding things in symbols was a way of being able to try to communicate what's beyond this ordinary mind. It was also understood that because they're so highly symbolic, you would need somebody who understood that code of symbols and to work with somebody in order to fully understand that oneself. So it's not a do-it-yourself project. Kundalini, of all the yogic paths, really needs the support of somebody who's experienced, because the mysteries of consciousness and being sort of enmeshed in the maze of the mind also needs an outside perspective to help keep us grounded and help us to see what's a way forward. We also have to recognize maps aren't the terrain. Even an ordinary map, you can study a map and then get out in the woods and get lost because what's represented on the map isn't the terrain itself. So our experiences are going to be different in many ways, but the map is sort of a general pointer to what's going on. And there are many maps. So they vary with traditions. I'm going to be talking more specifically about maps that come out of the yogic tradition, some about the Buddhist tradition that flowered out of yoga itself. But there are maps, the Masonic order has a map. There are maps in the Sufi tradition. There are maps that have been created by Christian mystics about indigenous people, by shamanic traditions. So there's not just one map, right? They highlight different areas of consciousness unfolding, and we can gain insights from them. But the truth is we can only walk one path, our path. And that was really why Kundalini was so highly prized and revered, is she opened what was going to be the unique way forward for the individual. Now, understanding these symbolic maps, Joseph Campbell talked about the fact that we suffer from what he called a symbolical deficiency. We're so used to working in the sort of concrete materialist world. Our worldview is dominated by scientific materialism. So the symbolic language that we need to understand this isn't a part of everyday language anymore. So we have to do something in order to become more fully acquainted with symbols and to be able to think symbolically. That brings in the work of a great developmental clinical psychologist, Jean Piaget, who wrote about the cognitive development of human beings. And for him, the highest stage was this called formal operations thinking. And it's where symbolic thinking just begins. Symbolic thinking and profound symbolic thinking that we're talking about and that many people here have experienced, well, it goes even beyond that. But one of the things he noted was even formal operational thinking, the majority of the population doesn't get to that level developmentally, cognitively. So they misread symbols, they take them concretely, forms the basis of fundamentalism and all the distortions that go with that. So you may find that you're understanding things symbolically, both in terms of your own personal experience and things that you read, and other people you talk to may have no understanding of it, because developmentally, they may not have come to that place where they can grasp that. And it's this sort of encoding of teachings in symbols. Well, in part, it was thought that this was a way of protecting them, but it was really because this is the kind of language one needs. Now, there's a great yogi and scholar, British scholar, Sir John Woodruff, who back in the late 1800s and early 1900s studied deeply in the tantric and yogic traditions in India. And he wrote an extraordinary text called The Serpent Power. And in it, he translates a number of the real esoteric texts on Kundalini. If you're really interested in diving into this subject matter, this is something that you would want to read at some point. But he made it very clear, and when he said that to truly understand this yoga, one has to be learned in Indian philosophy and religion, the nature of ritual practices, and the specifics of these in Shakta and monistic, in other words, non-dual Shaivite tantras. He concludes that the only way to genuinely practice this yoga is under the guidance of an accomplished adept and one who has been through the process of Kundalini unfolding under the guidance of their guru, who can therefore guide and safeguard the aspirant on their journey with its attendant risks. Because Kundalini unfolding can take us into areas of consciousness we may not have been prepared for. That's the risk. So being prepared and understanding goes a long way to easing the journey forward. Now, when we start looking at actually then what is Kundalini Shakti, this opens the door to really the magnificent view of what this is. Because a lot of people think Shakti is a thing. No, Kundalini Shakti is the infinite. It's the power of the infinite that gave birth to all that is within itself as itself and has the power to know that. So Kundalini Shakti isn't something foreign, isn't something different. Those are yogic Sanskrit terms, and the term Kundalini refers to coiled one, sort of points to this potential power that's inherent to each and every one of us. But the power of consciousness, well, that's known across traditions in different sacred ways. Everything from Grandmother Spirit to the Holy Mother, to Shekinah, to Chi. These are all other terms that other systems have of looking at this power of the infinite to create all that is and to reveal what that is. When we talk about awakening of this power within us, we're talking about an aspect of that power of consciousness that allows us to know the infinite as our own self, that all that is our own self. It's unity consciousness, not the concept of unity consciousness, the direct awareness that's right here, right now, right here, right now. You are the infinite divine. You always have been. You can't become more divine than what you are right now. You are the fullness of that. Knowing that comes through this innate power. That's what we talk about, especially in the yogic system, about awakening of this power. There's a dimension of this power that's already awake. That's the dimension that, it makes our entire body function. Every thought is Shakti. Every pulse of your heart, every movement of your body, every strand of energy making up the atoms that make up the molecules that make up every cell of your body is Shakti. Already functioning completely to sustain that level of reality. So when we talk about the aspect that's awakening, that's the power to know our unity with all that is and get free of the confines of limited I awareness. Our consciousness at this point tends to be very much identified with that little ego sense, that limited I awareness. Somebody asks you who you are. You say, I'm this, I'm that. It refers to your professions, maybe the gender of your body, things that you do in the world, relationships. That's not what this is talking about. This is talking about knowing the infinitude of being that embraces all as itself. It's the knowing that when St. John of the Cross talked about, he was given a vision to see through God's eyes. And he said, why did no one tell me that when God looks at the world, all he sees is himself? To know that takes this awakening of power. It also then engenders along the way this power of discrimination, a root quality of the practice of yoga, viveka, discrimination, is to be able to tell the difference between what's our true eternal nature as the divine and what's this limited vehicle of the ego, mind, and body. And that's something that further develops along the path. But when we want to look at sort of how did we get to this state, because that's when we want to understand, well, how am I going to go beyond this? How did I get here? Starts to show, well, how do I get free of it? And in the monistic tradition of Kashmir Shaivism, this ancient tradition from India, and monism means sort of a step beyond monotheism. It's not just there's one divine, It's all there is the one divine. So monism points to the fact that all there is the infinite, the divine, taking on of its own accord various forms and limitations. So Kashmir Shaivism talks about these 5 facets of this infinite power of Shakti, and that this power has the power to creates all that is, sustains it, has the power to sustain it, has the power to dissolve it, has the power to conceal its true nature, and the power to reveal that. That power of concealment and that power of revelation is central to understanding yoga, Kundalini yoga, the unfolding of consciousness across these kinds of practices related to the yogic traditions. Because concealment means in order for the infinite to know what it is to be finite, right? Because if the infinite could only know infinitude, it would be limited in some way. It's not. So it has the power to know what it is to be finite, but in order to know that, it has to conceal from itself its own infinite nature. That opens a space, in a sense, within the infinite that can give the appearance of limitation, of lack, of want, of need, of limited forms, of being limited in time and space. All these things happen as a result of that concealing the infinite from the infinite so that the finite universe can unfold, including the evolution of consciousness as an individual across lifetimes. When that process finally starts to culminate, that process of evolution across lifetimes, we start to intuit, oh, there's something greater than just being this ego, just lacking one thing or another, driven by, attraction and aversion, seeking one thing after another to try to be happy. Once we start to look past that and begin this process of, in a sense, inquiry, it's based on this innate power already starting to stir, Kundalini Shakti. It's known as the power of revelation and transformation. Anugraha means the power of grace. Grace means it's the power that removes all limitation and all the suffering that comes out of that limitation. So when we understand that that's the nature of Kundalini, when we talk about it specifically within the yogic tradition, it's the power of revelation and transformation. And it's the power of the infinite to do so. The Katha Upanishad says the self reveals the self. The self, the divine, cannot be known by study, instruction, hearing about it over and over, etc. The Katha Upanishad, the self reveals the self to the self when it chooses to. When it chooses to means when that evolutionary process across lifetimes has ripened that individual soul to the point of now really seeking to know the highest, that's when that individual is ripe for this awakening. And it may happen in a life when they don't even recall that they had done practices or done things in the past. So it can seem quite spontaneous. So this power of revelation that's known as Kundalini Shakti begins stirring and awakening as the soul ripens. And it's clear that it's that power that draws us into that direct knowing. It's not the knowledge of chakras, of Sanskrit, of nadis, that will give us entrance to the abode of the one. Nothing, literally nothing, enters unity consciousness. We leave behind all those identifications to know the infinite as our own self. So it's also then when we start to look at this process, and I was just talking about how awakening Kundalini happens in this ripening process. Well, this is the evolution of consciousness across lifetimes, according to the yogic tradition. And we start in unity consciousness. The concealment of that gives birth to what the individualized consciousness is. And as an individual, we're seeking experience. We're seeking to explore what it is to be limited and all the different domains of experience. This was part of what it was to take on and explore the universe of forms in a limited form. And we do that for lifetimes after lifetimes after lifetimes. It's also called the Savriti phase. It means the phase in which we're taking on forms. When we finally get tired of that drama and start to go, oh, there's got to be something more than this. I don't want another form, please. That's when we're to remember, awakening is a great metaphor, because when we awaken in the morning, we awaken to a reality that was already fully present. We just weren't aware of it. Kundalini awakening is going to awaken us to the reality of our unity with all beings, all creation, and the infinitude of consciousness that is our true nature. That starts this phase of, that's called the Nivritti. Nivritti means you're shedding forms. You don't want to create more karma. You want to get done. You want to come back to knowing, back to merging into unity consciousness. And that's what then most of the maps are looking at, this return phase, this Nivritti phase. But we understand we got to there because, well, it was consciousness itself that created this. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a punishment. It was consciousness exploring what it meant to be finite. Now it's time to recover our experience of what it is to be infinite. That happens with Kundalini awakening. And that's why it's described as the descent of grace. Shaktipat, that's what that means. It's the technical term for the descent of grace, this awakening. And there are countless forms. And I've worked with thousands of people in India and the States, from around the world, countless forms and intensities of this awakening process. But Kundalini, as a process of transformation, well, it's aimed at bringing us to the very highest. It's sort of one-pointed on that. The mind may vary off in saying, oh, that was an interesting experience. Oh, healing happened. Should I be a healer? So the mind is always thinking about becoming things and doing things. Shakti is going, no, stay with just this opening and expansiveness of awareness. That's going to, as part of her process, engender what are called kriyas. And kriyas are spontaneous movements of Kundalini that are aimed at clearing the subtle body, the physical body, of any kind of impediments that prevent us from knowing the fullness of our own divine nature and seeing that divinity in everyone, in all the world. Everyone, no one left out. That's really important, because the vision of the divine, when we see through the eyes of our own divinity, all we see is the divine, even in the worst of individuals. It's a blossoming of the divine, and we can bring that loving presence to even that kind of encounter. The unfolding of Kundalini, well, it culminates in what's called Sahaja Samadhi, living Samadhi. So it's not just Samadhi in yoga, no thought form, nothing. You've dissolved into the infinite. So there's no duality, there's no experiencer and experience. Kundalini was known as, oh, it takes you this next step, the step into then being able to live that, even as the mind and body are present as limited vehicles of consciousness. Even that is embraced by your own sublime divine nature and informed by that kind of direct knowing. So that's living Samadhi. We live in that unity consciousness. It's a state that's beyond the ordinary states that we're familiar with, the waking dream and deep sleep states. And it's beyond words. Buddha tried pointing at it when he would talk about the four immeasurables, that the quality of this consciousness is boundless loving joy, boundless wisdom, unshakable equanimity, boundless compassion. These are the qualities of that consciousness. That's what we want to come to know. So when we start with either having a spontaneous awakening of Kundalini, we're interested in it, we start looking into, oh, what's this inner terrain of consciousness? Meditation invites us to go in. What do we discern? How do we see what's going on in there? And so we need to be able to start to differentiate it in certain ways for the sake of the mind, not for the sake of your divine self. Your divine self is complete, full, knows all of this. This is all for the mind. All practices are for the mind. The only thing that's bound is the mind, not you. But until we know we're not the mind, you have a mind, you're not your mind. You have a body, you're not limited to the body. But until we can live that fully, completely, oh, then we have to work with the mind. So we have to start to be able to discern these inner components of the field of consciousness. There are 4 states that we're not necessarily familiar thinking in that way. There's the waking, dream, and deep sleep states. We're familiar with those. They're discontinuous. If you're awake, you're not in the dream state. If you're in the dream state, you're not in the deep sleep state. I worked with EEGs and brain wave patterns for many years now, and you can see all these kind of differentiations of states and states of attention, states of waking, dream, deep sleep that are differentiated. There's a 4th state that most people never come to know. It's the state of yourself, your infinite self, your divine self. It's called Turiya. It's continuous. It is the state of meditation. It is the state of profound meditation. Profound meditation is unity consciousness. It's the consciousness of the infinite that knows all and embraces all as itself. That's what Shakti Kundalini, that's her nature. That's what she wants to reintroduce us to. Now, each of these bodies, each of these states of consciousness has associated with it a body. Well, the physical body goes with the waking state. That's a physical body. But the subtle body, well, that's not really a body at all. That's more like if we talk about a body of knowledge. It's an abstraction. The subtle body is the body of mind, emotions, feelings, the energies of consciousness that move through the subtle body that have to do with what we'll talk about later of chakras and nadis. And so not physical, but at the same time, many of these aspects of the subtle body we're very familiar with. Right now, you're paying attention with your mind. You know, you're aware of your thoughts and feelings. That's all in the subtle body, associated with your physical body right now. Just beyond that is the causal body. And the causal body is so named because it's the cause of the creation of the subtle and the physical body. Okay, so when we go back to the states of consciousness, the waking state goes with the physical body. The dream state is the state that we most purely experience as the subtle body. We're free of the confines of the physical world, so we can do things in dreams, fly, go back in time, forward in time, do all kinds of things that you can't do in the physical realm. The causal body goes with the deep sleep state. And the deep sleep state is this awareness of nothingness. And why is it nothingness? The infinite has negated itself, but hasn't created all the forms that will fill mind and body. So it's causal for what comes in terms of limited eye awareness associated with the subtle body and the physical body. The supracausal body, well, that's not a body at all, really. That's the infinitude of all that is and all that's beyond all forms. That is the Turiya state. Now, Om is one of the ancient mantras that is an expression of that. And in fact, Om is comprised of 4 syllables or 4 sounds. One is not a sound, it's silence. The Ah, the U, the M, and then the silence. Because in the Eastern traditions, they recognize everything arises out of stillness, out of silence, dissolves back into stillness and silence. Om arises out of stillness, dissolves into stillness. The stillness, the silence, that's the source of all. That's what it's drawing us into. And mantra is a royal vehicle for entering that because mantra comes from beyond the mind. So it can take us beyond the mind. So when we look at Om, this is the Devanagari script of Om, and we can see, it's up above it, there's this crescent shape and then a black bindu, a black dot. That black dot represents that stillness, the portal. A bindu is the portal. It's the portal out of which everything enters into this world and through which everything dissolves back into infinitude. And you'll see it at the heart of yantras. So a mantra is the sound form of the infinite. It's created by Shakti. Yantras are created by Kundalini Shakti as visual forms to serve as a vehicle for taking us back. Now, interestingly, the yogis talked about how this Sanskrit Om, when chanted, created this vibratory pattern that they call Sri Yantra. That's what's depicted here, an artistic drawing of that. Well, thousands of years had to go by before a tonoscope was invented. And a tonoscope is a thin membrane with a very fine powder on it. And when you chant Om into the tonoscope, it produces Sri Yantra. So the Eastern traditions look at all of creation emanates from this subtle domain of vibration, a throb of energy itself, the energy of consciousness. And that's what then enters the universe and creates all forms. And we can use it to go backwards in a sense. We can use mantra to go back then into the infinitude. And that's how it serves. And it serves as a very important component of Kundalini sadhana, because mantra is one of these pure forms of Kundalini. And so it's used as a way of attuning the mind and body to this much more subtle, much more refined, and much more powerful vibration of consciousness called Shakti, Kundalini, the power of the infinite, resonant within each and every one of us. Mantra becomes a way of being able to attune us to that kind of experience. Much like if you took a tuning fork, right? And if you smack a tuning fork and you're standing next to a piano, the string in the piano that corresponds with the tuning fork will start to tone. Well, when we do mantra, empowered mantra, these great mantras, they attune, they help give rise to that same vibration within us. And so they become a critical way of helping to quiet, refine, harmonize the energy of transformation when it's moving very powerfully. It's calmed and harmonized through the power of mantra. So a very critical piece of being able to work with Kundalini. Now, as we're looking at sort of this inner terrain and where we're going to go through these different states in order to come back to unity consciousness, we also need to be aware that, in a sense, blowing across this inner terrain is this steady wind. And it can blow us off course. It's the wind of ego, right? Of ego consciousness. It's limited eye awareness. And the Shaivite and the Kundalini traditions have a beautiful way of looking at it, actually, because it was created by the infinite, the self, to know limitations. It's a divine creation. It's not the enemy, right? We don't have to get into a fight with it. We just have to be able to step back from it and go, oh, that's that instrument that should be here to serve me. Why am I running around serving my ego? So that's one of the big shifts that happens in sadhana is we start to see we're just driven by this ego-crazed mind. Well, the world is driven by that. One of the fundamental qualities and dynamics of the ego mind is prediction and control. And another that comes out of that is domination and exploitation. And it's that unbridled ego consciousness that's afflicting the earth, that's afflicting all beings on the earth. That's part of what we have to evolve to get free of and train it. It should be a master serving. How do we honor and revere the unity of all life and respect that? Well, that takes an ego, but it's one that is in service of the highest, not dissociated from the highest and in service of its own petty realms. That's part of the evolutionary process that Kundalini unfolds for us. The ego mind is also known as the power of self-appropriation. It says, it takes on things. I am this, I'm that. It gathers all together, all kinds of experiences. It strings them together. When Buddha deconstructed the ego mind, he realized it's just a series of experiences. that are woven together by the mind saying, this is me. And it has a beautiful experience from, a month ago, 7 years ago. See, I had this experience. That's me too, right? In Kundalini sadhana, we want to know the divine every moment. We don't have to cling to an experience we had yesterday, the day before, 6 years ago. That just shows we're not in accord. We're not in unity here and now. So sadhana wants us to have that direct experience that's called ever new. It's ever new because it's unfolding in each moment. And part of what the ego tries to appropriate things is it wants to identify with it. So we have to teach it to step back, detach, become the witness, watch. That's what helps set it free. So that's one of the wins we have to be aware of that's in the course of sadhana that we deal with. And it's part of what Kundalini begins to introduce us to it as it starts to move through these different centers of consciousness. Now, the chakras are just centers of consciousness. And this is a classic map, and it's in the Soul's Journey, and you can read more about it in there in detail. But it's a way of depicting how do we go from unity consciousness, the Sahasrara, crown of the head, to earthbound Muladhara chakra, the limited identification with mind and body. And it really delineates stages of that happening. We don't need to know this. There's plenty of mystics in many traditions who never heard of a chakra or a nadi or any of these things. So don't think that there's a prerequisite. You won't get into unity consciousness until you pass the test and answer the questions on how many chakras are. But what are the petals of those chakras anyway? No. This is just a way of helping to orient this towards, there was this gradual coalescence of pure infinite consciousness. And it's represented by, first it becomes subtle mind. Then it solidifies a bit more, becomes ether or space, solidifies a bit more, becomes air. Then it becomes even more solid, becomes fire, then water, then earth itself. It's a symbolic form of representation of involution, how consciousness becomes involved in creation and becomes the finite world. Evolution, the awakening from this earthbound awareness, progresses upwards. That's a process of expansion, of opening further and further, discovering who and what we are. And the movements of Shakti as it moves through the physical and subtle body, it can shake the body. Well, that was recognized in other traditions. In fact, in the Christian tradition, there were Shakers and Quakers. Well, the Shakers and Quakers were having the Kriyas, the physical movements of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, that's another name for Kundalini, for Shakti. So we see this interrelatedness and interconnectedness of all these different great traditions. Now, that helps to get oriented towards this path. It's going to be a path of expansion, but it's not going to go smoothly. It's not just going to go up in a straight line. It's going to vary. We're going to go through different states of contraction and expansiveness. And another kind of map of understanding that is this archetypal mythological vision. It's called Ascent to Union. And this was actually one that the Shakti revealed to me in meditation. I was preparing to write my doctoral dissertation on Kundalini and was meditating on what's the real nature of this. And she unfolded this whole mythic vision of the journey of Kundalini through the chakras. But now, instead of the classic form, she started to talk about this archetypal map. And there were three particular characters: the queen representing the Shakti herself, and the captain and a first mate who represented the mind and body. And they went on this extraordinary night sea journey that culminated in really this Shaktipat experience of this bolt of lightning. And then they get transported, in a sense, to another entire realm. And then there's this pathway that moves up through that realm. And each of the chakras now are being represented by domains of consciousness, the earth domain, the level of subsistence and just maintaining our existence. Moving beyond that into the Swadhisthana chakra, the water. There was a city of water based on passions and feelings and emotions. And there were various positive qualities as well as various traps that are part of each of these cities. Next, it would move up into the Muladhara chakra. Well, that's a center of consciousness that has to do with willpower and force. And it's a very fiery realm, represents the element of fire. Well, all that was unfolding. And so on and on and on through this vision, right up to the completion, the merger into the infinite in the Sahasrara, that completes that journey of what it is to come back to the truth of who we are in union with the divine, with the infinite. But in a sense, the hero's journey, the yogi's journey, has one additional step. We come back down, but bring that wisdom, that light, that knowledge. It's not left. We don't just disappear then. We bring it back for the benefit of all. Right? And that's also part of our journey, is to come back into the world, to walk these highest truths, to walk your highest nature into the world. And I've made this into now a separate booklet. It's a chapter in the soul's journey, but if anybody wants a copy, a free copy of it, I'm happy to send that to them. And because it's another one of these extraordinary archetypal mythic journeys depicting what this unfolds as our own experience, coming to know the infinite as our own self. Now, Joseph Campbell provides another map when he talked about the monomyth of the hero's journey, and in his volume, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And especially when it talks about the quest, the spiritual quest, the quest to know the highest, the quest to know God, the quest to know the divine in all its fullness, the truth of who you are. And it's primarily an inward journey. That's where we come to know it. It's within the crucible of our own heart, our own being. And so Campbell talked about that it shows up over and over again, whether we're talking about Buddha, Christ, Moses, Shankaracharya, Laleshwari, Mirabai, Saint Teresa, all these great beings who went on this journey. They went through a period of separation. Remember, we step back from the ordinary confines of the ordinary world, the conditioned mind that shapes the ways we think and how we see. We step away from that. And then there's some kind of initiatory process. In yoga, that's very specific, as in other traditions. But it initiates a transformative process, and it initiates the opening of the doors of awareness to who we are beyond the mind, who we are beyond all the ways that we thought of ourselves to be throughout our life, to get free of that. When we fully explore then this new reality of our unity with all that is, then we're ready to return. Then we become so direct that it's with us at all times, in all places. Then we're in that place to be able to return and truly walk that into this world and give it to others, to validate it in others, to reflect it in others, because that's what we're called to do. Because in the end, there is no other. There's only ourself. No matter who we meet, no matter who we greet, we're only greeting ourselves. To know that, to live that, that's the unfolding of grace. That's why it's called the power of grace, of Anugraha, in the Kundalini Yoga tradition. But it's the same across all the great mystic traditions. Another one of Joseph Campbell's books, The Transformations of Myth Through Time, he talks more about this, also specifically in regard to Kundalini. He also talks about another map, the map of the Grail legend. We don't have time to go into that, but it's another map of the soul's journey across lifetimes. Now, this is another map. We talked before, just a moment ago, about Yantra. And Yantra is the visual form of the infinite, right? Mantra, the sound form of the divine. Yantra, the visual form. Before I had a picture up of Sri Yantra, the yantra that goes with the mantra Om. This is the yantra that goes with Kali. And so it's called the Mahakali Yantra. People who have read some of my works know that Kali has been a dominant force in my life from my earliest memories. I didn't know to call her Kali then, but that's been my experience. And I was about to give a retreat back in 2005 on Kundalini Shakti and the mysteries of the divine feminine. And I was meditating, it was a couple of weeks out from the retreat. And Kali comes in meditation and says, I'm coming to the retreat. I said, oh my, you always come to the retreat. You bless everybody. Or it's so, no, she goes, no, I'm coming. I said, you know, I'm just going, yeah, I know you always come. She goes, no, I'm coming like this. And in that instant, I disappear and the Mahakali Yantra appears as this picture, only all radiant light, radiant Shakti. That's all there was. And the black Bindu is the portal at the center. That's what absorbs our individual consciousness and leaves all the limitations behind. We enter that portal. That's what happened. And as I came out, it was actually a few hours later, I started to come back to consciousness, and she was still very present. And I said, oh, how are you going to do that? She said, well, you're going to paint it. I went, Ma, I've never painted anything. You can't ask this of me. And I have neuropathy in both hands. They shake. I can't do this. She goes, yes, you're going to do this. And this was the painting she had me do by her grace. And then she told me the whole explication, the meaning of it, because a yantra, and Joseph Campbell writes about it as a machine that takes us into the infinite. We start out outside the yantra, and this lines around it is called the four-gated city. It's made up of two lines. It's the first test. How do we get into this inner field of blue consciousness? These four lines, so it's a four-gated city, it indicates you can approach from any direction, north, south, east, or west. So you can approach it from anywhere, but how do you get inside? The gates aren't open because the gates, they indicate the past and the future. If you're not fully present, if you don't leave behind the past and the future, symbolized by those two lines, you can't get into the inner sanctum. Once you're fully present here and now, then you begin to enter. Then you encounter these blazing petals of the lotus. And they face in all 8 directions. And there's a little red line, 2 of them in each one. They represent Bhairavi and Bhairava. They're 2 ferocious forms of Shiva and Shakti that are protectors. They're not going to let anything get through. In other words, all your ego stuff, leave it behind, not going to go in, or it's going to get burned up in these flaming petals. The next thing you encounter are these circular lines. Well, there's 3 of them. You can barely see them. They're the next test. That means those 3 lines, they represent the 3 gunas, the 3 qualities of consciousness that make up all the universe. Oh, we have to transcend that. They're represented often if you see yogis with 3 lines of sacred ash. They represent the 3 gunas. We have to transcend them to get to the infinitude of being, of the Sahasrara. That only gains us entry into her mysterious black abode. Black meaning totally mysterious, unknowable by the mind. Then we see her forms as these downward facing triangles. There's 5 of them. So there's 15 points. They correspond, there's a whole symbolism behind that, to the 15 days leading up from the new moon to the full moon, and more into the depths of her as the divine feminine. But at the heart is the black Bindu. That's where she draws us into leaving everything behind, so that we come to know that in the end, all there is boundless love, boundless consciousness, dancing as all these forms, dancing as our own self, dancing as the body and mind. That's what we're drawn into by the power of the Mahakali Yantra. And so that's her gift. And people who've come to the retreat have gotten Shaktipat just doing the meditation and looking at this. Right? So these are maps, and they're all highly symbolic. You can see, if you didn't know the symbolism, you go, well, that's a nice picture, pretty colors, that's all right. But once you start to know what the symbols mean and what they're pointing to, you start to go, oh, yes, I want to enter that. I want to go into that space of pure knowing. That is Mahakali. Now, once we start to enter that and are being transformed in this process, well, that's really what my research at Temple University. I was a university scholar there, and I did my research on Kundalini back in 1986. And one of the things I was studying, what are the kinds of transformations that occur in people who have been long-term practitioners. These were individuals who had practiced for more than 10 years. And there were people living everyday lives in the world. So that was one group. There was another group of people who were living in an ashram, kind of a monastic situation of intense yoga. And then there was also a group that were the swamis, the monks, colleagues of mine. And I looked at them, and it was interesting. Across all three groups, the same kinds of transformations happened, these profound changes. And that's what was then most recently written up in last fall in the article that came out in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology. But there are 169 types of change that went across 7 categories. There were physical changes, changes to their body, changes to emotions and emotional patterns, freeing old patterns of conflict, inner conflict, outer conflict. There were mental changes around concepts and ideas and belief structures. There were relational changes, being much more attuned to love and presence and connectivity, getting free of old emotional patterns that interfered with relationships. There were conceptual changes, attitudinal changes, changes in values and priorities. All of these things happened in the course of people's ongoing sadhana. Because these were people who had gotten enlightened, they were still doing the work. But even in the process, all these things had shifted as a result of that transformative process of the descent of grace into their lives. And I've seen that as well. And I've done programs in prisons. For some years, I volunteered on Sunday nights. I just went into prison. It's a federal penitentiary, and did meditations and mantra chanting, the great Maha mantras of the Shakti traditions that I came from, Om Namah Shivaya and Om Kali Ma, and Aham, simply I am. And seeing that even within prisons, even people who had committed horrific crimes, extraordinary transformations. Men, I was working in men's prisons, federal penitentiary, having experiences of the divine just within their own prison cell, and saying, my prison cell now has become like a monk's cell. I had one inmate tell me, I'm freer now than I've ever been in my entire life, coming to know the infinite as my own self. If a person within the concrete walls and steel bars of a prison can come to know that, can't every one of us? That's what this opens us up to knowing it in all its fullness. Now, the state of what Kundalini unfolds is completely beyond words. It's completely beyond any concept of self that we might have. And the great sages have spoken about this. One of the great sages of Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, Shankaracharya. Well, he was already considered an enlightened sage when he had an experience of awakened Kundalini. And it so broadened and opened his state of consciousness even further that he wrote an ecstatic poem to Kundalini called the Sundarya Lahari, in which he proclaims Kundalini Shakti as the basis of all yogas. In fact, the basis of all creativity, all genius, everything. The entire world is born out of Kundalini Shakti. It's also why she's known as the great goddess, the divine feminine that gives birth to all, including this state of freedom. Right? And then he went on to also write an extraordinary poem called the Nirvana Shatkam. And it's the six stanzas on salvation. And in it, he talks about, he says, I am not the mind, the intellect, the ego, or the memory. I am not the ears, the tongue. I am not the nose and the eyes. Neither am I air, nor fire, nor water, nor earth. I am the form of pure consciousness and bliss. I am Shiva. I am the auspicious one. That's what Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. I am consciousness and bliss. I am the auspicious one. I am Shiva. That's the closest words can come to pointing at what this exalted state is. When Buddha experienced it, same state. And so when he talked about it, he wound up trying to convey it through the Heart Sutra. Now, it's interesting, the Heart Sutra, which is just a foundational text in the Buddhist tradition, is a revelation of what that state is. And what's it known as? The official title of the Heart Sutra is the Bhagavati Mahaprajna Paramita Hridayam. Bhagavati. Bhagavati is the great goddess. And he goes on to say, the great goddess, Bhagavati, Mahaprajna Paramita, this highest wisdom, is the mother of all Buddhas. Our Buddha nature, our enlightened nature, is born from Shakti revealing that we are not the mind, not the body, not the thoughts, not anything that can be pointed to. We are the sublime awareness that takes all forms. So he winds up saying very similarly, he says, no ear, no eye, nose, tongue, body, mind, no color, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought, or object of thought. None of these things are who we are. In the end, we can't say anything. He doesn't even want to posit, Shankaracharya wanted to say, I am consciousness and bliss, I am Shiva. Buddha won't even go there. You're nothing. In the end, the summary mantra is Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi Swaha. Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi Swaha. Gone, gone, gone beyond, completely gone, completely beyond all. Hail the goer, the Bodhisattva. That's you. That's everyone. That's where we're on the journey of discovering and coming to know the truth of who we are. Whether we call it Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness, Kundalini consciousness, I don't care what the words are, because none of them capture the truth of who we are. And it's that journey and these maps that help point the way that is the unfolding of the fullness of our own true being, our own true nature. And along the way, we'll have many different experiences and we'll need many different forms of help. In my book, The Awakening Kundalini, The Path to Radical Freedom, I wrote about it because Tammy Simon, the head of Sounds True, asked me to write that as a kind of a compendium to help people. But I talk about, we may need all kinds of healers. We might need, in terms of the mind and body, what it needs as support for going through this kind of radically transformative process. And to understand we're not meant to do it alone. Grace wants to connect us with all kinds of other beings going through this process for their support, for their love, for their guidance, for their help. Just as we've gathered here today, just as the work of Yvonne and Spiritual Awakenings International is helping to support people, to give them understanding and a context. Because two emotions that are most disruptive for the unfolding of this innate power of Kundalini are fear and anger. And often when people are first having their experiences of awakening, the poor ego mind is so shaken, it either goes into fear or it gets pissed that this kind of thing is being demanded of it and goes into anger. And both of them make for a turbulent ride. So the quicker we can let go of the fear and the anger, the more we can come into that gracious embrace and guidance of Ma Kundalini Shakti. So I think we're about ready for Q&A, yes?
I know there's a lot of questions that people have, but the question that I would love to ask is, how did your Kundalini journey begin? Could you please about that first, and then we'll go into
And which lifetime would you like me to talk about? See, I mean, one of the limitations, frankly, is our Western minds think in one life. So why they think spontaneous awakenings, but because you're not aware that you did it in past lives. My experiences began, and not everybody will have these experiences, when we receive the gifts of experience that Shakti wants, not what the ego mind pursues. And that's really critically important. It's the higher consciousness that gives us experiences. For me, it was also experiences of past lives, which I was a monk in many different traditions and had the experience of initiation. And in this lifetime, began having experiences when I was 3 years old of the divine presence. This is what I called as a 3-year-old, the Lady of Light, and talked to my mother and whoever would listen to me as a 3-year-old, that there was a Lady of Light standing over my bed. She was really nice, but what was she doing there? Well, that unfolded, and I write more about that in The Soul's Journey, and how that visitation returned and expanded. But we can look forward, each one of us, to the unique qualities of consciousness that will be introduced to us. Each one of our paths is the path of grace unfolding. And we will be given exactly what we need for our journey. You don't have to walk somebody else's path. We can only walk our own.
Perfect. Thank you. That was beautiful. You know, it is inspiring, though, to hear the path that others have taken.
Yes.
So we can be inspired to our own. There's a question that was reflected by several people, but specifically Marianne and then Julianne have started the same question and carried it on. If the body experiences that vibrating, shaking during meditation that sometimes occurs with Kundalini, is there information about how to deal with this body vibrating in your books? Or do you have something that you can share with us now?
Well, both. I mean, yes, I can go into it much more further in the books and the audio programs. Also have free, I have over 100 free videos online. The Ankara Meditation Foundation is a nonprofit I started. We have all kinds of free information available online and videos. So lots of free resources on the Ankara website and the Soul's Journey website. The vibrations and all forms of Kriya, basically what we're cultivating is the ability to be detached and aware and just watch the unfolding, really with an attitude of, these are gifts of grace. We never know what's being purified, what's being cleared, what's being opened. We just watch with this understanding that what a magnificent process is happening. Let me just breathe. Let me especially take refuge in mantra, because mantra is what helps to often calm down, because mantra gets into places that the mind and body need the energy to enter. Mantras is sometimes referred to as this, as both a grace bestowing power, but it literally, whether you were chanting it or repeating it silently, it enters right down to the marrow of our bones and brings this power of transformative grace into every aspect of who we are.
Excellent. So mantra as a vibrational force, that was beautiful to allow things to evolve as they should. The full description of yantra in your book, Soul's Journey, is that correct? Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, yantras, there are many different forms of yantra. So yantra basically is a pictorial or visual form of the infinite. Mantra is the sound form of the divine, right? So various mantras can be associated with particular yantras, and you would focus visually on a yantra. And by becoming absorbed, and you'll see many of the yantras have the bindu at the heart of the yantra. And so the various symbolic components of the yantra are drawing attention in and helping us get free of, the past and the future. So I've got to let go of that. Now I'm entering closer. Now I have to let go of more things that I'm identified with. Now I have to let go of even anything that seems substantial about the universe, the three gunas. I have to pass that. Now I'm going beyond the mind completely. Now I'm in a state where only the power of Shakti is going to operate. Because if you try to do something as gross as a volitional movement of mind, you'd be back outside of the yantra. So it requires this ever refining consciousness and the ability to be steady in that state of consciousness.
You're describing a beautiful state of surrender. Thank you. I could feel it in my heart as you spoke. Anna Cecilia has a very interesting question, very practical too. Do you use any special practices to be able to come back to the present moments when some struggles appear in life?
Right. Well, yeah, it is a great question. And in many ways, the entire set of yogic and meditative practices are aimed at having us be here and present. In the yogic tradition and even in the unfolding of Kundalini, one of the foundational practices is just rhythmic breathing, slow-paced breathing. Doesn't have to be forceful. In traditional Kundalini practices, it's a very calming, just a diaphragmatic slowing and deepening of the breath. Because now research has shown, and this is especially part of my field, and I was on the faculty of New York Medical College for 24 years and lectured about this. It's this, when we start to pace and slow our breathing, it creates a whole cascade of neurophysiological events that calms the amygdala, the sort of center in the brain that has to do with the fight, flight, freeze response. So the ancient yogis just kind of figured out this ancient mind-brain hack. Slow and deepening the breath begins to calm our physiology, calms the brain. Now we can much more easily let go of this thought or that thought because it's not being emotionally driven by fear, reactivity, and the stress response. So the very practical thing has to do with slowing and deepening the breath. When we add to that mantra, if we're saying Om Namah Shivaya slowly once on inhalation, Om Namah Shivaya slowly once on the exhalation. Well, it's interesting, the research, and I've replicated this in my own clinical work, the 6-syllable mantras, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Namah Shivaya, when they're said slowly, it takes roughly 5 to 6 seconds. You say it slowly once on the inhalation, once on the exhalation. It brings the breath into what's known as a resonant frequency. It's a built-in response of the body connected to the relaxation response that helps us come back to the moment to be relaxed and clear, present and aware, ready with the fullness of who we are to deal with whatever's unfolding in the moment.
I'll bet this next question relates to everything you just said, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is the antidote for fear in the Kundalini process? And in this case, I don't think we're talking about fears in life, but fears about Kundalini. So if you want.
No, I work, so often people come to me, they're reaching out of fear. And part of it is we need to better understand, we need to better know what's Kundalini doing. It's really there as the power of grace transforming mind and body. So we have to understand the intention behind that. We also have to understand that the fear is being generated by the ego mind because it, for our entire life, thought it was the only presence in here. It was the only one home. And now suddenly there's other power. It's wiggling me, it's shaking me, it's making my mind race or slow down or disappear. Who's doing this? So we want to have compassion for the poor mind that it gets upset, but we need to talk to it and say, it's okay. This really is the unfolding of our own power of grace and transformation. And now, let me learn some ways that help to calm me. Let me slow and deepen my breath. Let me learn how I can develop a steady posture in my body. Let me discover that, oh, if I really turn my mind to Om Namah Shivaya or Om Kali Ma, or even just the sound of the breath. The sound of the breath comes in with the sound hum and goes out with the sound sa. It's an ancient mantra. It means I am that. If I'm just listening, the hum as the breath comes in, the sa as the breath comes out, it starts to calm and quiet the mind and body. So we start to learn that we can be skillful at working with this response that has been engendered by the nervous system and the amygdala and these things. But the yogis discovered, oh no, there's many ways to work with that and to calm that so that it won't be an impediment.
So we have about 5 more minutes, and I have about 3 or 4 more questions that are begging to be asked. So if we come up in 1 minute, maybe we'll get there.
Right.
Could you discuss briefly the future directions for Kundalini-related research?
All right. Okay. But I just want to add something about mantra because I mentioned it many times. And I want people to, be very cognizant of the fact, mantra isn't something you should buy. Okay. Mantra, the highest mantras, these empowered mantras that certainly come through the lineages I've been a part of, are freely given. I give them freely. They're given through the works that I've published. They're given freely on the websites. They're given freely in the videos, through chants, through talks. So they're freely available and accessible. Same as I was doing, bringing into prisons, into hospitals, into hospice situations, everything. So they're freely accessible to people.
Thank you.
Now, when it comes to the research, there are certain aspects of the research that are very challenging because Kundalini Shakti is everything. Everything. There's nothing that's not Kundalini. In the physical world, in the psychic world, in the consciousness itself, it's all Shakti. So when we think about research in terms of scientific research looks at measurables. So at best you can come up with is correlates of the presence of Shakti and trying to find correlates that have to do with the physiology, correlates of measurables. But the ultimate state of consciousness, the ultimate research is what you do by entering the state of meditation, the state of Turiya, the state of universal consciousness. That's what unfolds that. The material world, yes, we'll find ways of correlating physiological states of quiescence, but also states of unbelievable activity. So it used to be thought meditation was just the slowing and quieting of the brain. Oh, but then we discovered that there are gamma brainwave patterns. Those are very fast brainwave patterns that have to do with different areas of the brain lighting up and going into synchrony. That's associated, and it's associated with Kundalini, and it can be associated with practices like Tummo, this breath and generating heat in a Tibetan Buddhist practice. So there are many things that are going to be, looked at. Research in scientific research looks at measurables and usually looks at things that correlate with what people are interested in: increased health benefits, increased concentration, increases in peak performance training. These don't have anything to do, these are side effects of Kundalini. Kundalini wanted you to know the divine as your own self and see that in every moment in every being. But these other kinds of changes happen as well, and research shows that.
Well, I think that we're really at the end, and I want to thank you for everything, but there's one last quick question. They're asking, do you have to be initiated by a teacher? Do you have to be under the guise of a teacher in order to use these mantras? And I know we can find the research because you're easily accessible online, but can you just ask that one question as we go out, please?
Yes. Can you do practices on your own? Absolutely. Can you use the mantras on your own? Absolutely. But if you're wandering around lost in a forest because you left the guide at the fence and said, I can do this on my own. I've done that. I've bushwhacked and gotten myself into trouble when I used to be mountain climbing. So is it doable? Yeah. How many lifetimes you want to wander around when help was available? So we want to have the discernment, choose good help, choose help that is selfless, that's kind, that's loving, that isn't threatening, that you don't feel like, oh, I'm better off by myself. No, where you go, oh, this is a companion who can really walk with me and prevent me from falling in that hole. That's what it's about.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely beautiful. I loved every moment of it, Dr. Edwards, and we were honored to have you here with us today. Thank you so much.